The night sky over the northern forest blazed with a fiery streak that lit up the stars like daylight. Most people in nearby towns thought it was just a meteor falling. But Jack Ryland wasn't like most people. He had once been a scout for Earth's reckoned forces before the war ended, and even now, living alone in the deep woods, his instincts were sharp. He watched the sky, saw the angle of the fall, and felt a chill. It wasn't a meteor, it moved like a ship. It was crashing. Grabbing his coat, his rifle, and a pack of gear, Jack moved quickly through the trees, following the distant smoke trail that was now curling above the pines. The forest was silent except for the wind, but he could feel the pulse of something wrong, something unnatural. Hours passed as he moved over rough ground. Dawn began to break by the time he reached the crash site, and what he saw confirmed everything he feared. A strange pod lay cracked open in a grove of twisted trees, the metal scorched and still smoking. It wasn't like anything Earth had ever built. Its edges were too smooth, its surface shimmered like water, and it gave off a soft hum that buzzed in Jack's bones. He approached slowly, watching for signs of movement. And that's when he saw her lying beside the wreckage. She looked almost human. She had long silver hair that flowed like liquid light across the pine needles, and skin pale and faintly glowing as if it caught the sunlight in a way no earthborn person ever could. Strange blue marks like tattoos or circuitry ran along her arms and neck. Her clothes were torn and stained with dark blue blood. She was breathing, but shallow and slow. Jack knelt beside her, touched her wrist, and felt a weak pulse. She was alive, but only just. He had no idea who she was, or what kind of danger might come with her, but leaving her wasn't an option. He wrapped her in a blanket and carried her back through the forest, all the way to his small cabin, hidden deep in the trees. He laid her down gently on the old cot he had used during storms, cleaned her wounds as best he could, and watched over her in silence. She didn't wake that first day. Jack kept the fire going, changed her bandages, and wondered what in the hell he had gotten himself into. There was no signal on his radio. No news, no alerts, just silence. The world hadn't noticed the crash or was being kept from noticing it. At night, she tossed and turned, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Sometimes she groaned in pain. Once she sat up suddenly and shouted a word, Kareth. Then she collapsed again. Began to use the name as he talked. To her, "You're safe now, Kareth," he said quietly. "You're going to be all right." By the second evening, she opened her eyes. They were unlike anything Jack had ever seen, deep violet with stars moving inside them like galaxies trapped in glass. She looked around, confused, scared. When she saw him, she froze, clearly not knowing if he was friend or enemy. Jack raised both hands and gave her a small smile. "You're safe," he said softly. "I found you in the forest. You were hurt. I brought you here." She blinked, as if trying to understand. Her lips moved, and she spoke again in that strange language. Jack shook his head. "I don't understand you," he said gently. "But I'm not here to hurt you." Over the next few days, they found ways to speak. Simple words, gestures. She learned fast, smarter than anyone Jack had ever met. He learned her name truly was Kareth, that she came from far beyond Earth, that the pod was hers, that she was running from something. The more she said, the more serious Jack became. There was fear in her voice whenever she mentioned a word Korthax. Her face would darken, and her hand would reach for the blue mark on her neck, as if it still burned. Something powerful had chased her across the stars, and now she was here. Wounded and hiding on Earth, Jack kept a watch on the skies every night. He had a bad feeling. He wasn't wrong, though the forest remained quiet, though no one came searching yet. He could feel it in the air. Kareth, this strange, injured girl who now sat near his fire and slowly taught him pieces of her language, wasn't just a lost traveler. She was someone important, maybe someone powerful. And if something was hunting her, it wouldn't stop until it found her. Jack didn't understand the size of the storm that was coming, not yet. But he had made a choice the moment he carried her from that crash site. She was under his protection now. Whatever she was, Wherever she came from, he would stand between her and whatever came from the sky, 'cause that's what humans did. That's what he did. And out there, far above Earth, something monstrous was already on its way. Kareth opened her eyes slowly, her body still weak, but her mind sharper than before. She whispered one word again and again. Kareth and Jack finally understood it wasn't just a name, it was her identity. She touched her chest every time she said it, as if reminding herself who she was. Jack helped her sit up, holding a bowl of soup to her lips. She drank slowly, watching him with those glowing violet eyes. She had healed faster than any normal person could. The cuts on her arms were already fading, the bruises disappearing. Her skin shimmered faintly in the candlelight, and when she moved, her body was graceful like water. Over the next days, she began to speak more. At first, it was just broken. English Jack pointed to things and gave her the words fire, sky, food, safe. She repeated them, learning faster than any child could. And when she began to form sentences, the truth started to come out, piece by piece. She told him about her people, the Velarian ancient race that once ruled many stars, but had turned to peace after generations of war. She said they believed in wisdom, art, harmony, and balance with the universe. They had ships powered by light and cities that floated in the skies of gas giants, but their peace made them weak. The Korthax came like a storm. They were not builders, only destroyers. They burned what they could not control, enslaved what they could not understand. Kareth's people tried to resist, but the Korthax were too many, too cruel. Planet after planet fell. The royal family of Velar was targeted first. They were not just rulers, they carried a power. An ancient force passed through their bloodline, tied to the energy of their homeworld. This power, Kareth explained, was not a weapon, but something more, something that could awaken minds, heal the wounded, or even calm a raging storm. Korthax feared it, and so they hunted it. Kareth was the last. Her ship had been the final escape. Her guards gave their lives to launch her into space, sending her in a cloaked pod toward the outer galaxies far from the reach of the Dominion. But even through the emptiness of space, the Korthax had followed. Their ship found her. They shot her down. She had just enough energy left to crash into Earth and then nothing. She looked down when she told Jack that part, her hands trembling as if the memories still burned her. Jack sat in silence for a long time after hearing her story. He believed her, didn't know how or why, but everything in her voice, her eyes, and her presence told him she wasn't lying. She wasn't human, but she wasn't a threat to Earth. She was running for her life. Now Earth was part of her path. As the days passed, Kareth grew stronger. She moved with purpose, helping Jack fix the roof, gather food, and cook meals. But every night, she sat by the window, staring at the stars, her hand resting on the glowing mark near her collarbone. That mark, Jack had learned, wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of royalty, a living circuit that responded to her thoughts and energy. It could glow, flash, or even create tiny sparks when she was angry or afraid. She said the Korthax could track it if they came close enough. That scared Jack more than anything. He started preparing. He set traps in the forest, dug escape tunnels, stored food and water. Kareth joined him, offering ideas, sketches, strange devices from the remains of her pod. She was clever, calm, but something in her had changed. The fear in her eyes had started to harden into something else, resolve. One evening, while checking a motion sensor near the cabin's perimeter, Kareth said something that made Jack stop. In his tracks, she said, "No more hiding. I must rise. I am queen." Jack stared at her. "Queen?" he asked. Kareth nodded. She explained that her mother had died in the last days of the war, and the title had passed to her, but she had never accepted it. She was young, unprepared, afraid, until now. Her time on Earth, her survival, and Jack's kindness had awakened something in her. She said humans had something rare: fire without cruelty, strength without conquest. She said it gave her hope. Jack didn't know what to say. It fought in wars, seen what humans could do when pushed. But hearing it from her, someone who had lost everything, moved him. That night she stood by the fire, her long silver hair glowing with light, her voice strong and calm. She said she would no longer run, that if the Korthax came, she would face them. She would protect the planet that gave her shelter, and she would be more than a survivor. She would be queen. Jack watched her closely. She didn't look like a lost girl anymore. She looked like someone ready to change the fate of worlds. Deep in his chest, he felt something stir: respect, loyalty, and something more. He knew then that whatever was coming, he would stand with her, not just because she needed him, but because the galaxy had already taken too much from her, and it was time to fight back. The first sign came with a deep rumble in the sky, a sound that didn't belong to thunder or storms. Jack stepped outside the cabin and looked up. Thin lines of smoke crossed the blue sky, and glowing dots were falling from orbit to controlled to be meteors. He grabbed his binoculars and climbed the nearest hill. From the ridge he saw them clearly. 3 dark ships shaped like black blades cutting through the clouds. The Korthax had arrived. There was no warning from Earth's defense systems. No global alert. The Dominion didn't believe in grand invasions. They hit fast, hard, and silent. By the time they landed, it was already too late. Major cities around the world lost power within minutes. Satellites blinked out. Communication systems failed. People ran into the streets, confused and afraid, watching the sky turn red as Dominion fire ships blocked out the sun. Jack returned to the cabin, his face grim. Kareth was already at the door, eyes wide with fear, but not for herself. She had known this day would come. She only worried for Earth. "They are here," she whispered. Jack nodded. "Then we fight." They moved quickly. Jack armed himself with everything he had: an old rifle, homemade grenades, even hunting traps. Kareth gathered what was left from her pod: a small energy core, a shattered blade, and a device like a wristband that pulsed when enemies were near. They packed supplies, loaded food, and vanished into the forest before the skies darkened completely. But the Korthax were already searching. By evening, scout ships hovered low over the woods. Black drones dropped into the trees, their red eyes glowing, scanning everything. Kareth and Jack hid under the roots of an old tree, breath held as one of the drones passed just meters above them. Then came the ground forces Korthax warriors, tall and brutal, covered in dark armor that looked grown instead of forged. Their weapons pulsed with deadly light. One night, just as Jack and Kareth were reaching an old ranger station deep in the forest, a Korthax patrol caught their scent. The battle was quick and brutal. Jack used traps he had set earlier, spring-loaded spears and flash mines. He managed to kill one of the warriors with a blast from his shotgun, but another tackled him hard, slamming him against a rock. Pain shot through his ribs as the warrior raised a glowing blade. Then Kareth screamed. Her eyes lit up with a pale blue fire. Her mark flared like lightning. Shockwave burst from her body, throwing the warrior backward. The trees bent. The air crackled. When it was over, the forest was silent again, and the warrior was dead. Jack coughed blood and looked up at her. She stood tall, breathing hard, arms glowing faintly. "You're getting stronger," he said through clenched teeth. Kareth knelt beside him. "And you're bleeding," she replied. He smiled, "Just a little." Shh. She pressed her hand to his ribs, and the pain eased. Not fully healed, but better. Ow. They hid in the ranger station that night, patching wounds and watching the stars. Jack knew this was just the beginning. The Korthax wouldn't stop until they found her, and now they knew she was alive. The attack had confirmed it. But it had also awakened something in her power she hadn't used since leaving her homeworld. She had tried to hide it, to live quietly, and there was no more time for hiding. Jack saw the way she looked at the night sky, her hands glowing gently, her eyes full of quiet fire. She was remembering who she was. Earth was being burned from orbit. Jack had picked up a scrambled signal from a destroyed radio tower. Whole cities were going to vaporize by Korthax beams. Nations were falling, but there were survivors, pockets of humans fighting back. He thought of all the people still resisting, still hoping, not knowing there was a queen among them. The next morning, as dawn barely touched the treetops, Kareth stood tall beside the river. Her voice was strong when she spoke. "They won't stop until I am dead. But I will not die here. I will not let Earth suffer for sheltering me." Limped to her side, his bruised ribs aching. "So what do we do?" She looked at him, her gaze deep and unshaken. "We strike first. We fight." He stared at her, and in that moment, she wasn't just an alien girl he had found broken in the forest. She wasn't just someone he helped. She was a leader, a queen, and he would follow her, even if it meant standing alone against the galaxy's most feared enemy, because now it was personal. The Korthax hadn't just invaded Earth, they had come into his forest, hurt his people, hunted the one person who had trusted him, and that was a mistake they wouldn't survive. In the cold ruins of an old military communications outpost buried deep in the forest hills, Jack and Kareth uncovered what might be Earth's last chance, ancient Valari beacon hidden inside the wreckage of her escape pod. She had kept its secret, wrapped in cloth, waiting for the right moment. The device was smooth and silver, shaped like a half-moon, and it pulsed with soft blue light. Kareth told Jack it was a royal distress signal, one that could reach the far corners of the stars and call any surviving Valari forces to her. But the beacon had no power. It needed energy more than a generator could provide, more than Jack's tools could manage. But Jack had a plan. He remembered an old military bunker hidden in the cliffs north of the river, a place once powered by fusion cells before the war. If any part of it still worked, it might be enough to activate the beacon. The journey to the bunker was rough. Dominion patrols filled the skies. Drones swept the forest. Jack and Kareth traveled at night, staying low, hiding under rocks and fallen trees. Once they were nearly caught by a Korthax scanning ship. It hovered so close that they could hear the metal plates creaking, but they waited, silent and still, until it passed. When they reached the edge of the cliffs, the bunker's metal doors were barely visible under vines and snow. Jack found the old access panel and used a power tool to force it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. They moved through the tunnels, their lights bouncing off long dead screens and shattered consoles. But deep in the heart of the bunker, the power core still glowed faintly. Jack worked fast, reconnecting wires and rerouting energy lines with Kareth's help. She touched the beacon to the core, and the entire room lit up with a pulse that shook the ground. The signal launched. A bright blue wave shot into the sky like a flare, disappearing into the stars. Somewhere far beyond the edge of Earth's system, it would be heard. But the Korthax felt it too. The beacon sent out a ripple that exposed their position. Within minutes, the bunker's sensors picked up incoming ships. Ate a full Dominion strike. Team was on the way. Jack and Kareth had only hours to prepare. They reinforced the doors with scrap metal and rigged the hallways with trap strip mines, wire explosives, and old plasma rifles from fallen Korthax soldiers. Then they waited. The ground trembled before the first enemy ship landed. Dominion warriors poured into the forest, their armor hissing and glowing, weapons ready to kill. The battle began with an explosion at the front gate, followed by screams and flashing lights. Jack fought with everything he had, ducking behind walls, firing from cover, using every trap to slow the enemy. Kareth stood at the center of the bunker, eyes glowing bright, energy swirling around her like a storm. When the Korthax reached her, she raised her hands, and the world bent around her. Light pulsed from her fingers, blasting warriors backward. Her power had returned, and with it came the strength of her bloodline. She was no longer hiding. She was fighting for survival land, for Earth. The battle raged for over an hour. Smoke filled the tunnels. Jack was wounded in the leg by a glancing plasma shot, but he kept going. He covered Kareth, reloaded weapons, and dragged fallen enemies into defensive positions. Together, they held the line. At one point, a massive Korthax brute charged into the chamber, tearing through defenses. Jack fired his last grenade, but it wasn't enough. The brute raised its blade to strike. Kareth stepped in. She moved like light, her hands cutting through the air, sending a wave of energy that split the brute's armor It fell to the ground with a crash. When the last enemy fell, the bunker was nearly in ruins. Fires burned in the walls, and Jack lay slumped against a beam, blood on his face. Kareth ran to him, her hands glowing as she tried to heal the worst of his wounds. He looked up at her and gave a weak smile. "Told you we'd make a mess," he whispered. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. But above them, the sky began to flicker. Something was coming. Not Dominion, something else. Kareth stood and looked through the cracked ceiling. She reached out with her mind and felt the answer. The beacon had worked. Reinforcements were on the way. Somewhere in deep space, the last of her people had heard her cry. They were coming. And now, Earth would not stand alone. For the first time since the war began, there was hope. Not just for survival, but for something greater. A chance to fight back. A chance to win. The air above Earth cracked open like torn fabric, and the skies lit up with shapes not made by human hands, sleek. Silver ships that glowed with soft blue light, descending in perfect silence. Kareth stood on a rocky hill, her armor shining. With new energy, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with recognition, the Valkyrie had answered.
Ow!
Her people had come. The distress beacon had reached them across the stars, and those still loyal to the lost royal family had risen. A whole fleet had arrived, dozens of ships, some small and fast, others large and majestic, with curved wings and glowing crystal engines. The moment they appeared, Earth's fate began to shift. The Korthax Dominion, who had grown arrogant and bold in the absence of resistance, now met an old enemy returning from the dark. Above the clouds, war began again.
Valerie.
Ships opened fire first, their weapons pure light that burned through Korthax metal like fire through dry grass. The Dominion was caught off guard, but they reacted fast, calling their own reinforcements from nearby sectors. More black ships entered Earth's skies, and the peaceful planet turned into a battlefield. Cities already damaged now became front lines. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of distant thunder was not whether it was war, but something darker loomed. From deep space, the Korthax flagship entered orbit. They called it the Oblivion Fang. It was massive, a floating fortress the size of a moon, blacker than space, covered in glowing red scars. It moved slowly, like death given form. It carried a weapon that had already erased to Valerie homeworlds. If it fired on Earth, the planet would be lost. Kareth knew what it meant. The Valkyrie fleet, brave and fast, could not stop the Oblivion Fang alone. It had to be destroyed from the inside. She stood on the command deck of the lead Valkyrie ship, dressed now in royal armor. Her crown wasn't gold or jewels, it was a glowing mark that circled her forehead, lit by the energy of her ancestors. They looked down at Earth, then turned to Jack. He stood beside her in stolen Korthax armor, patched and rough, carrying a heavy blaster on his back and a calm look. In his eyes, he had no title, no power, but every warrior on the ship treated him with respect. Kareth placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved me when I was nothing but a broken girl in a strange world," she said. "Now together, we'll end this." Jack simply nodded. "Let's finish it." They led a small team of fighters, Valkyrie guards, and human volunteers aboard a stealth ship and approached the Oblivion Fang under cover of a fleet battle. Explosions danced all around them as ships clashed in orbit, as lasers, plasma bolts, and fire crossed the sky. 2 Valkyrie cruisers were torn apart by Dominion beams, but their sacrifice gave the small team a clear path to the flagship. The stealth ship latched onto the surface of the Oblivion Fang, like a tick on a beast. Then they cut through the hull and entered the heart of the monster. Inside, the ship was a maze of metal, glowing with red light, filled with the sounds of hissing steam and distant roars. Korthax soldiers patrolled every level, hulking warriors with glowing eyes and weapons fused into their arms. The team moved fast, fighting when needed, sneaking when they could. Jack led with precision, setting charges and clearing paths, while Kareth followed the pull of the ship's energy, sensing the location of its power core. One by one, they reached the central chamber, but not all of them made it. Some were lost in firefights, others in collapsing corridors. Jack took a blast. To the shoulder, but kept moving. Blood dripped from his armor, but his hand stayed steady. At last, they reached the Korra giant sphere of spinning red light. Held by metal arms and guarded by the Dominion's deadliest soldier, the warlord of the Fang. He stood taller than the others, his armor marked with the bones of Vailari royals, his weapon a massive blade of dark energy. The fight that followed was brutal. Jack and the others attacked from all sides, but the warlord was fast and strong.
Ow.
One by one, more of their team fell. Jack fought with fury, his blaster overheating, switching to a knife when the ammo ran out. But even together, they couldn't stop the warlord. Then, as the blade came down toward Jack's chest, Kareth stepped between them. She caught the blow with her own hands. Pain flashed in her eyes, but she didn't fall. Her body glowed with blue fire, and the mark on her head flared like a star. She screamed not in fear, but in fury, and a wave of energy burst from her, knocking the warlord into the core. The red sphere cracked, sparks flying in all directions. The core was collapsing. Alarms rang out. The ship began to tear apart. Jack grabbed Kareth, blood dripping from her side, and pulled her toward the escape pod they had passed minutes earlier. They jumped inside, slammed the hatch, and launched as the Oblivion Fang exploded behind them in a silent, blinding light. From space, the dark ship shattered into pieces. And the sky above Earth lit up with fire, but this time, it was not destruction. It was victory. The sky above Earth burned with light as the shattered pieces of the Oblivion Fang scattered across space like broken teeth, glowing red in the darkness. From the small escape pod drifting through the edge of the battlefield, Jack and Kareth watched the destruction unfold in silence. Their bodies were bruised and bloody, their breath heavy. But their eyes were fixed on the wreckage of the Dominion's strongest weapon. They had done it.
Act.
They had destroyed the monster that threatened Earth, but the battle was far from over. All around them, the Valari fleet and the Korthax armada were still locked in combat. Ships twisted through the sky, firing bolts of light and heat, tearing through the cold void with blasts of fury. Every second, another explosion painted the sky. Jack leaned back in his seat, his shoulder bleeding again from the deep cut he had taken inside the flagship. Kareth, still glowing faintly, reached out and touched his chest, whispering soft words in her language. A cool energy flowed into him, slowing the bleeding and easing the pain. He looked at her amazed, and she gave a tired smile. "You should be resting," he muttered. "I will rest when it's over," she replied. Their pod was soon picked up by a Valari cruiser, its crew cheering when they saw Kareth alive. She stepped onto the deck not as a lost girl, but as a queen's shoulders. Straight, voice calm, eyes glowing with purpose. News of the flagship's destruction spread fast. The Valari soldiers, once scattered and afraid, now fought with renewed fire. Earth's skies turned into a war zone of hope. Humanity's forces, ragged and struggling, had been trying to resist the Dominion with little success. But now, seeing alien allies stand with them, they rose up. Old warships were pulled out of storage. Pilots took to the sky in rusty jets. Civilians armed themselves and defended their homes. And everywhere the battle touched, the name Kareth became a symbol not just of royalty, but of resistance. Yet the Dominion didn't retreat. They doubled down, sending more warships from nearby sectors. Their hatred for the Valari Queen was deep, and their pride wounded. They would burn Earth before they let her survive. In orbit, a giant Korthax battleship descended, ready to strike the surface. Jack stood beside Kareth on the Valari command deck, watching the enemy on the screen. The ship was powering up a main weapon. If it fired, it would destroy a whole city. "We can't reach it in time," the Valari commander said. Kareth stepped forward. "Then I will." She activated a memory crystal at her waist. A silver crown unfolded across her head. A suit of glowing armor wrapped around her like light made solid. She turned to Jack, her eyes filled with both strength and sorrow. "I need to go up there, alone." Jack frowned. "You just got out of one death trap. You're not walking into another." This one is different. I'm not going there to destroy it. I'm going to speak. Jack didn't understand. Kareth explained that her energy Valori royal power was more than force. It could reach minds, break through fear, even slow the darkness inside creatures like the Korthax. But only if she faced them directly. It was dangerous. Maybe impossible. Jack clenched his jaw. He had stood by her since the forest. Didn't want to let her go now? But he saw it in her eyes. This was her purpose. She kissed his forehead softly and whispered, "You gave me strength when I had nothing. Let me give it back now." Then she stepped onto a personal craft and rose into the sky. Jack watched until her ship disappeared into the light of the battle. On board the enemy battleship, Kareth broadcasted her voice across all frequencies. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She spoke with calm, pure truth. She spoke of peace, of memories, of stars once shared by all living things. And something strange happened. The Korthax crew hesitated. Some trembled. A few dropped their weapons. Her words touched something buried deep in those shaped by war. But not everyone was moved. The Dominion commander, furious, charged at her. She raised her hand, and a wall of light rose between them. Her power wrapped around the ship's core and drained the weapon. It would not fire. Not today. At that moment, the rest of the Valari fleet struck the final blow. The enemy ship, stunned and confused, was disabled. Earth was safe. Kareth returned, her strength nearly gone, her body shaking. Jack caught her as she stepped down. "Did it work?" he asked. She leaned into him and whispered. They listened. Around them, the sky slowly cleared. Fires died. Ships retreated. The war was not fully over, but the worst had passed. They had won, not with rage, but with courage, with sacrifice, with hope. The escape pod drifted gently over Earth's peaceful blue skies. Its surface scorched and marked from the explosion of the Dominion's monstrous warship. Inside, Jack sat with his back against the curved wall, holding Kareth close, as her body trembled with exhaustion. Her strength was almost gone, her breathing soft and slow. But her eyes remained open, still glowing faintly with the power of the Valari. She looked around, taking in the clouds and sunlight, the sight of Earth beneath them, untouched by fire for the first time in days. Jack gently brushed a lock of silver hair away from her face, his own arms covered in cuts and dirt. His voice quiet as he said, "You did it." Kareth blinked slowly and smiled. She whispered, "We did." The silence between them was heavy, not with fear or pain, but with something else, relief. After everything they had endured, they were still alive. The war had not ended completely, but the greatest threat had been destroyed. The Korthax flagship, the weapon meant to erase Earth in one strike, had been turned to ash. And it had happened because of them, because a man from the forest and a lost queen from another world had stood together. Soon, their pod was spotted by a Valor research ship, and they were brought back aboard one of the main vessels. As they stepped onto the deck, cheers rose around them. The crew, both Valari and human, bowed to Kareth. Many wept at the sight of her alive. Jack was stunned to see how much her people loved her not as a ruler made by blood, but as a leader made by action.
Kareth
Stood tall, though her legs shook. She gave a brief speech, her voice carried across the ship's systems, thanking everyone, honoring the dead, and promising that this fight was not the end, but the beginning of a better future. Jack watched from a quiet corner. He didn't want praise. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He had only done what he believed was right, protecting someone who had once looked helpless and lost in his forest, someone who had since become something far more. As the days passed, the skies above Earth cleared. The remaining Dominion forces pulled back, some driven away by the growing Valari resistance, others simply retreating in confusion after losing their leader and their strongest weapon. Earth, battered but not broken, began to recover. Humanity had seen war from beyond the stars, and instead of surrendering, it had fought alongside the very alien it once feared. Cities rose again. Communications were restored. And a new alliance began to take shape between the humans of Earth and the Valari, who had once hidden away among the stars. Kareth spent her time moving between ships and cities, helping where she could, guiding her people, and bringing hope wherever she walked. But each night she returned to Jack. No matter how tired, no matter how many battles she had to fight with words or wisdom, she always came back to sit beside him, to rest her head on his shoulder, to speak softly about things only they remembered: the forest, the fire, the night sky before the war. One evening, as they sat atop a hill overlooking a rebuilt human base, Kareth took Jack's hand and placed it over the glowing mark on her chest. "This once marked me for death," she said, "but now it reminds me of the man who gave me a second life." Jack didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with big words or royal ideas. He only knew what he felt, and it was something he had never felt before. Not just love, but something deeper. A bond formed through survival, trust, and sacrifice. He looked at her and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." She smiled a real smile and leaned into him. From the skies above, the first joint human-Valori fleet began to form. Ships with 2 flags, one of Earth, one of the stars. Together they would explore the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as survivors who had earned their peace. Jack once, a forgotten soldier living in silence, became a symbol of unity. Kareth, once a hunted girl crashing into a strange world, became the queen of 2 peoples. She ruled not with fear or command, but with kindness and courage. The galaxy would remember her not as a weapon, but as a voice that refused to be silenced. Their story, born in the heart of a forest and forged in the fire of battle, spread across systems like a song. And though the stars still held danger and the shadows of war still lurked in distant corners, a new age had begun, one lit by the strength of one human, the heart of one queen, and the bond they had built together.